all for reassembling once again. I think what we should do is just start with a quick round so everyone can introduce themselves, and then we'll move into some discussion from there.
So I'm.
Okay. Oh, can you hear? Yes. Yep. Okay.
Right. Okay. My name is John Fredriksen. I'm the ambassador of Norway to Canada since the fall of 2020. So I've been here for 2 years, and my second time I'm at the Arctic360. So good to see you all.
Good morning to you all. My name is Eriksson. I'm the Finnish ambassador here in Canada since 2019, also my second time here.
Hi, I'm Crishock. I'm the United States Senior Arctic Official. It's my first time here, very glad to be here. I've been the US SAO since 2021.
Good morning, my name is Heidi Kutz. I'm the Senior Arctic Official for Canada, yielding from Global Affairs Canada, also serving as Director General for Arctic, Nordic, and Eastern European Affairs.
Good morning, my name is Kenneth Høegh, and I'm the representative of the government of Greenland to the United States and Canada. And this is my second time here as well. I was here last year.
My name is Hanne, Fugl Eskjær. I am the ambassador of the Kingdom of Denmark to Canada. I've been that for 3.5 years. Before that, I had the honor also to be our Arctic ambassador for 3 years. So it's really, I feel at home when I'm in an Arctic setting like us today.
My name is Hlynur Guðjónsson. I'm the Icelandic ambassador to Canada. I've been here for 1.5 years. Good to be back at the Arctic360.
So, as we've just started out discussing, this Friday is going to be exactly 1 year to date from the start of Russia's invasion into Ukraine. Last year, our discussion here took place 10 days into that war, and at that time, the future of Arctic cooperation was uncertain. But already, when we were having those discussions, we were talking about finding ways, new paths forward for cooperation. I think we also kind of hoped that maybe today we wouldn't be where we are, and the war would not be continuing as it is. But maybe we could start by taking stock on this past year. You know, where are we 1 year later? What are some of the main takeaways of this past year? And we can go just across. Okay.
Well, I think for sure it's been a very dramatic year for the world and for Europe and North America, in the sense that we have seen the war continue. We have provided an unprecedented amount of support for Ukraine in terms, including armed support. We, as an allied country in the Nordics, we have seen our neighbors, Finland and Sweden, join the alliance, or in the process of joining the alliance. And if you cross the Atlantic and I think go at least into my country, Norway, you will see that almost everything is about how do we deal with the current security environment that we have. So a lot of barriers broken, and a lot of new ways of thinking about how do we deal with our current security environment, and how do we deal with what is actually our immediate neighbor, Russia, going forward. Having said that, I think it's also important to recognize that we have energized a lot of partnerships between friends in the North and the Arctic. I think we have all demonstrated that we are eager to work with each other, that we have a lot of themes, a lot of problems and challenges, if you like to call it that we need to work with in the Arctic, regardless of what is going on elsewhere. A lot of partnerships that needs to be maintained, and not only that, but developed further. And then, of course, there's the whole discussion of how can we further develop resources in the North, and at the same time make sure that we do this in a very, very sustainable way, and with the indigenous partnerships that we need to have going forward. So, in a sense, I feel that it's two-dimensional handling of a very, very serious security policy crisis in Europe, a war effort, and at the same time making sure that we develop our partnerships further, not only for economic development, also for political development in the High North.
Well, for Finland, the obvious issue is that the dramatic change in the security environment, which led to our application to join NATO together with Sweden. That process has gone on quite quickly, dramatically. We're very happy that Canada was the first country to ratify our accession. There are 2 member states still that are in the process of doing the ratification. But what Russian aggression on Ukraine brought forth was also that I don't think NATO has ever been so closely knit, or the Western alliance. We kind of found each other again, and Finnish-Canadian relations, I'm really honest here, have never been so close as they are now. We have on some weekly basis contacts on if not political level, then on civil servants level. We have found a common interest in thinking about Arctic security. Also, like Jon was saying, the supply chain issue as well. We are all trying to move forward quicker now to a sustainable energy supply as Russia cut off all gas and most of the oil as well to Europe. So the green transition in Europe is going ahead a lot faster than anybody could have imagined. And here all the Nordics and Canada can be part of the solution, as we have the critical minerals that are needed for this green transition. So yes, who would have known last year that we are here, that actually we are closer than we've ever been before.
Thanks, Jessica. I'd like to echo what the 2 ambassadors said. I think as we take stock, we can really think about 3 terms: bravery, resilience, and resolve. The whole world has been inspired by the bravery of Ukraine's soldiers and citizens, and that's something we can't forget. Caving to Russia's brazen attempt to redraw boundaries by force would rip up the global rules-based order that we've all benefited from, with dangerous consequences not just for Europe, but for the whole world, including the Arctic. We're proud to be part of a global coalition that has imposed sanctions and export controls that are, as we speak, degrading Russia's ability to wage war and to advance this imperial project. We're also glad to be part of 50 countries and more who are helping to supply Ukraine's defense needs, and we hope that number will only grow over the weeks and months to come. And as my Norwegian colleague said, my Finnish colleague as well, that the resolve of the NATO alliance has never been stronger, and the unity hasn't been stronger. We see also increased unity among the like-minded Arctic states in security matters, but not only in security matters, and I think that bodes well for the future too.
I'm not sure how much more I can possibly add to the preceding speakers, but also your opening comments, Jessica. And I was here last year, and I remember how we all felt coming on to this panel. And in your comments, you highlighted 2 important things. One was last year's panel was one of the first coming out of, as people were starting to travel and come back together post-COVID. So that was the first thing. And the second thing, which you have outlined, is we were in the immediate aftermath of Russia's illegal and unjustifiable invasion of Ukraine. And that's where we sat together the last time to talk. And it was also, we talked in that particular moment about the pause that like-minded states had put on their participation in the Arctic Council. That body, standing for all the international law, sovereignty, and territorial integrity, which Russia flagrantly acted against. And so it was in that context that we spoke about the pause, the council being under Russia's chair, of course, till 2023. But what happened after that is like-minded states reenacted their cooperation amongst ourselves. Can't be business as usual with Russia, that's obvious because of the actions that they took. But in June of last year, we, working across our partnerships, reactivated all of those projects amongst our own countries. And I think that was important. But also in the last year, we have also seen, and many of us have been at the Arctic Circles in Nuuk, in Reykjavik, coming together again in Tromsø. And those are events, but what's happening in those events and what creates optimism on my part as we sort of think about the title of your conference, which is Accelerating and Invigorating Cooperation and Innovation, is the community of interests that lie behind the Arctic and our collective agenda. So I won't go more into that, but just to say I think that's an important element, just reflecting on how impactful our moments were together last year at this time to where I think we are here today.
Yes, it has been indeed a different year, I would say, a geopolitical shift. And we have had challenges in the Arctic cooperation. The Arctic Council, we all know about that. But please, we also see a lot of willingness to try to find a way out of this. Yes, I think we're getting closer together. The people in the north, in the North American North. And I just see that as something very positive. The government of Greenland, we joined for the first time sanctions against another country, and that was against Russia. We had an export to Russia of around 15% of our total export in 21, and now it's down at 0. We have decided this is something that we find very, very, very important. So we have joined the EU sanctions against Russia. But I think there's also many positive things to mention. We had the Arctic Circle Forum in Nuuk in August. We had the MOU between Nunavut and Greenland signed by the Prime Minister of Greenland and the Premier of Nunavut in Nuuk on the 26th of August. We have, of course, the Tartu-Peruk, the Hans Island Agreement, was extremely important, and I think that was very timely that we made this agreement at that time. I can tell you that this agreement has been safely deposited in Nuuk now. Greenland is the depositary of the agreement, which we find very nice and very, very right. Yeah, I mean, yes, we also have this very strong focus on the green transition and being the ones delivering to the green transition, both in terms of minerals, but also in terms of green energy. But simply our goals are pretty much the same. We still want a much stronger partnership with North America. We also see a focus on a North American pan-Arctic cooperation from Alaska to Greenland over Canada. And hopefully this will develop much stronger in the years to come. Hopefully we're going to have much more trade. There are signs of greater cooperation within aviation that would link us much closer together. Air Greenland and Canadian North, they made a letter of intent back in December 20, I believe it was, and hopefully this will materialize in something real. So yes, so it's mixed feelings I have. There are some global Arctic problems that we have to deal with, and there is a very sad conflict that is taking place, a very sad war. So yeah, but I think we should stick more closer together. That should be the answer to all this. So, when always, thank you.
For Denmark, it's exactly the same challenges, but also the same hopes as my dear colleagues have expressed. So I'll try to maybe give it a more Canadian flavor. I think what really has happened is that we are able to see each other again. And when you're an ambassador to the second largest country in the world, it has been such a challenge that we couldn't travel and meet the people of the north, of east and west, coast to coast to coast. And during that last year, if we reflect, what is the big difference? It is actually that we've been able to go out and have a real meeting, really understanding what are the opportunities, what are the thoughts, what are the challenges, all from we participated in the Arctic Art Summit in Yukon. Completely fantastic, and that was like indigenous artists from all over the Arctic that met for the first time in a very long time. I was able to participate in the Nunavut trade show, meeting with a lot of politicians, civil society, business people in Nunavut. That was the dream when I came to Canada 3.5 years ago, that I was able to do that. And I don't think we should underestimate what change that makes, that you meet people, you're in the same room as we are today. Magic happens, and you get just more creative. And I think we are more able to find the solutions to the huge geopolitical climate change challenges that we are all facing. So I would bring that to the table as something that has really changed. One of the things we did during COVID to actually understand and do this outreach was that we created what we call the Arctic Advisory Board. Clint Davis, you will hear from him during our 2-day program here, was part of that. In relation to Northern Lights, just a week ago or 10 days ago, we were able to meet most of the members of the Arctic Advisory Board in the same room. And I can tell you that that meeting was very different and much more fruitful. We were able to gather the brains from Greenland, Canadian, Arctic, Copenhagen, all around the same table. Also from the Arctic Economic Council. He joined us virtually, but still that was the first time we really met in person. So that people to people, I think that I would highlight as one of the really important changes that changed in the Arctic, but of course also in Canada and globally since we met and we were on this stage a year ago.
Yeah, for Iceland, Iceland has been content through the decades with its security and defense platform, which is basically NATO and our defense agreement with the US. But there has been this past year discussions in Iceland on that we need to bring that up again. We need to have and kind of discuss and view our security and defense policy in general. But again, understanding that those two pillars are the foundation of our defense and security in general, our founding membership of NATO and the defense agreement with the US. And this has changed the discussion in Iceland. Ukraine and the invasion changed the discussion in Iceland. Security and defense is much more a topic. Academia is again much more involved than maybe 2 years ago, and I think that's a positive move. I think we fall asleep in peace times when we think things are secure. But at all times we should be discussing those kind of fundamentals of our democracies, which is how we secure our sovereignty and etc. So I think that's, even though it's coming from a negative source, it's a positive change, I think, in Iceland when it comes to kind of taking stock. We did quite a substantial business with Russia. That on the export side pretty much disappeared in 2014. All the seafood products that we had to divert that to different other markets, which we did successfully. There were a few tech companies, specifically on sea tech, that were working with Russian seafood companies. That business has ceased and is not active anymore. As far as I know, we really don't have any platform in Russian or Icelandic companies at this point. I think what this has also done is to open our eyes for the value of democracy and the sovereignty discussion, which I think is important. And it has also opened our eyes and waken us up on how different players are acting in our territories, with interfering with our elections, opening up police stations on our home turfs, etc. And I think that is what we are seeing politically wise, is that we are understanding now that what we thought might be okay players or good players or somewhat players are not, that's not really the case. And we are seeing in the past actually an enormous amount of cases coming up, for example here in Canada, with interference of foreign states. And that's something that we are now understanding, and I think governments and others are kind of changing or thinking of changing their policies and their thinking towards those actors. So I think that's one of the big things that has changed. We heard John English mention that he didn't believe until it happened what was actually on the way, which was the Russian invasion in Ukraine. And I think today we are probably not going to have that. I think we're going to look at the process of things differently. What is happening, and our analysis, I think, going forward are going to be somewhat different than when we thought things were. Everyone was a good player on the platform.
No, it's great. Because I think we all want to believe in the good, and then we become sometimes disappointed when things, when you look for the positive and it doesn't come out that way. But I thought maybe we can go a little bit more specific. There's been, over the past year, we've also seen some more, kind of real positive developments in terms of not just strengthened cooperation, but really also a firm commitment to the rules-based order. And so, and maybe somebody can speak to some of these concrete examples where we are just seeing real new and enhanced collaboration and collaboration in terms of international law.
Well, maybe I'll open it. I know my colleagues will comment as well, and Ken already mentioned, in the past year, Canada working with Kingdom of Greenland, Kingdom of Denmark, and excuse me, Greenland's beside me. With Greenland, managed to solve a 50-year dispute over the Hans Island and maritime border covering Tartupaluk. And that was a real credit to what I think we had spoken about for a long time, to say, the Arctic is a rules-based region, and if we are work within that system and work to resolve our differences, we can actually achieve results. And so the Joint Border Treaty, I think, is a significant point in history, and as Ken noted, it is signed, but that's not finished. We are still working in terms of the implementation, working with Inuit communities on the management and mobility across the Tartupaluk area as we build that forward. So it is a very important point in history in terms of evidence of the rules-based order really working. So I think that's something that I would highlight within that framework.
Maybe building and relating a little bit to Dr. English's introduction of the creation of the Arctic Council and what happened and what have we been taking for granted. I think that agreement came exactly at the right time, when the world really needed a good example that through hard diplomacy, trust, patience, but first of all, international law, we were able to create that result among allies and among friends. And you all remember when the talk was about the race to the North Pole, and we were focused only on security before the Arctic Council really changed the focus. And as a response to that, the Ilulissat Declaration was made, where a number of Arctic states, coastal states, they committed to the rule of law, that any international disputes in the Arctic would be solved through dialogue and international law. And I think the Hans Island Agreement is a prime example that that can be done and that needs to be done. And that is the only way you can create borders. And right now we are really truly neighbors in the north. Before was 26 kilometers between us. Now we are really sharing a land border, and we are sharing the longest maritime border in the world. That also puts on a responsibility on all parties to this agreement to really make sure that this border will only be a facilitator for people-to-people contact. So as part of the 70 to 80 virtual negotiations, the marathon physical meetings in negotiating this, it was also an outreach to the hunting communities and the fishing communities in the north that would be impacted by this, asking what is important to you when we make this agreement. That was part of the process. I think that's important to remember, and that will be part of the follow-up as well. We just need to increase the people-to-people contact over Hans Island, not the opposite. So that's kind of also part of our commitment to ensure that that will be the implementation.
Yeah, I mean, from 1973, when the Kingdom of Denmark and Canada agreed not to agree about Hans Island, about Dr. Bedu, there's been a great development. I mean, especially in terms of the recognition of indigenous people's rights. And also, I mean, the thing is, the area around Ellesmere Island and Avannarsua, what is called Thule district in English, I believe. Avannarsua, that's what we call it. That is actually one people that has owned this area, that has been the ones who has been using this area for hundreds, for thousands of years. And then we have had this colonial situation where two colonial powers were, having some disputes about this area, and now we are moving into a new era where the rights of the indigenous peoples are looked upon in a totally other way and been listened to, and I just hope that this is something that will continue in the future as well.
Yeah. So is the Beaufort next? We could talk about that later. Well, let's move a little bit beyond, just political cooperation, because we know that economic cooperation is also a really large driver of security. Generally speaking, energy security, energy geopolitics, it really occupies an abundant space in the world of global politics. So when it comes to the Arctic, in some cases we see the Arctic being affected by energy concerns that are originating outside the Arctic. But we also are seeing, the Arctic as a region, as it grows in prominence due to its critical mineral potential, it's becoming actually its own driver of global energy security. And so, as we've been discussing, mining projects to manufacturing is one area where we're already seeing growing cooperation among the Arctic states. And so I'd just like to know, what kind of potential do you see the Arctic playing then in this global, as a region, in this global transition to the net zero economy? And maybe you could point to some areas of existing cooperation and where you think we can go in terms of strengthening.
I'd love to address that, and I think it's great that we're talking about this right here in Toronto, because last summer at the Prospectors and Developers Association meeting, Canada, the United States, Finland, Sweden, and other partners were able to launch the Minerals Security Partnership, where we committed to work together to catalyze public and private investment across the value chain in critical minerals while respecting the highest standards, environmental standards, social standards, and governance standards. And then later on the same year in Montreal, on the sidelines of COP15 of the Biodiversity Conference, Canada was able to launch and we were pleased to be a founding state as well in the Critical Minerals, Sustainable Critical Minerals Alliance, where we agreed that as we mine critical minerals, we need to ensure that we don't have associated biodiversity loss, that we continue to engage with indigenous communities, and that we limit the greenhouse gas emissions from this work. We were pleased to join this as a founding member. Just shows, once again, that we're committed to the highest standards in mining, domestically and internationally. This will be critical to the green transition, and all the while we need to defend workers' rights, human rights, communities, and the environment while we're doing this.
And just to comment on that, I mean, I come from an energy-producing country, very much so, oil and gas exporting 100% of Norwegian oil and gas production. We also provide hydropower to continental Europe, and I think along with Sweden right now are the biggest exporters of electricity to continental Europe. And obviously, I mean, the issue of producing energy in the Arctic region is not something new. It didn't come up now, didn't come up last year. Norway has oil fields in the Barents Sea, has had for a number of years. And, you know, it's been a huge discussion in my country whether, you know, should you move further north or not. The so-called, if you follow the Norwegian debate on this, you will find a lot of discussions on, you know, how close to the ice edge would you develop the resources and so on. And I think the issue of sustainability in producing energy in the high north is not something that we start to discuss now. We have a long experience. We have a lot of science on the table already. And it's not just about the hydrocarbons, also when it comes to the new energy forms that we need to develop. In the Western world, we need to develop offshore wind, onshore wind, hydrogen, as we move into the era of electrical vehicles and green shipping. We need to exploit new forms of fuels for ships and vehicles alike. All of this is something that we've been looking into for a long time. I think what happened now is that we feel a sense of urgency. And as Roy was saying, the green transition in Europe very much driven by the EU, and Norway is a part of that, as part of the inner market, even if not a member, is that it goes much faster than we would have expected. And that would probably, hopefully, also go for the science that goes with it. I would also like to mention that a part of this that sort of feeds into the same discussion is, of course, how do we develop the blue economy? Critical minerals will probably not only be found onshore, but also under the seabed. Deep sea mining is a huge issue that is still to be processed politically and environmentally. And the sustainable blue economy that will give us more proteins from the world oceans in the time to come is also a very important part of this. And there's probably no way of developing the blue economy without also developing new forms of energy to drive it. And I think that a lot of those discussions about sustainable development of energy security among allies and among like-minded democracies are local, because it's about what you do in people's backyards. But they also need to be discussions among us as states and allies. How can we do this together? EU will certainly be an important driver. The US will be an important driver, but I think all of us need to engage in those discussions, and a lot of those initiatives, as we already mentioned, are really important. I think we have a lot to gain from coming together, both on the scientific side and the political side, to address those issues as we move forward.
I would like to underline also that there is already a dialogue between EU, US, and Canada on critical minerals, and the efforts to kind of pool our strengths and have a common goal. The Nordic countries are all, like Canada, democratic countries rule-abiding societies. So it makes sense to rely on supply chains that come from these kinds of countries. And we take also the environment very seriously. Finland and Sweden and also Norway, we're quite happy in that we have a lot of natural resources. There was an announcement, unfortunately our Swedish ambassador is not here, when they took over the EU presidency in Kiruna, that there was a big find of rare earth minerals. I have to commend the Swedes are very good in marketing, because we have, I don't know how many times bigger finds in Finland that were found 20 years ago, and we didn't make much noise out of it. But the challenge is how to develop these mines so that you take to the sustainability, environment issues, and also the local people who live there. And that's why it takes years to develop these. And the urgency is now. I just read an article last week that we have in Finland only critical minerals that can provide 10% of all the needs in Europe. So we would need to speed up the processes, but we have to also take into consideration that we do it on a sustainable way. And talking about energy, now that wind energy is developing fast, I remember about a decade ago, analysts were saying Finland is not suitable for wind energy. There's no possibility for that. And now we are heavily investing in offshore wind, and in the 2030s, Finland will produce by wind all the electricity and more than we need. So we will be actually a net provider of electricity, which is then connected to EU and the continent. So that also gives us more leeway. We are not being kind of hold hostage to energy policies of Russia.
There are others? Yep.
Just a few words on Iceland in this. So Iceland is just over 80% of its total energy use is renewables, basically hydro and geothermal. But we have about 17 or 16, 18% of our total energy use, which is our car fleet, fishing fleet, and air. And there's a big push in Iceland to find solutions to transition that part of the Icelandic economy over to green fuels and electricity. I was just thinking when we were having this discussion here, and it's all positive. I mean, that's where we should be moving, and that's where we are moving. But there are also little few risks in here in the push towards this, and I just wanted to mention the European Union, for example, environmental tax on flights, on air travel, which would be, if it goes along as it is now, it would be devastating for the Icelandic tourism industry, and I guess probably Greenland as well. We would probably wipe out what we have as a tourist industry today, and that can't be the goal of those actions to proportionally kind of affect a small nation like Iceland in that extent. And we have seen those, we were just discussing at our table some memories back to the 80s on some NGOs working against seal hunting, for example, in the Arctic, and the devastating effect on the communities in the Arctic with those actions. And then the NGOs in question came back about 10 years later, and they apologized. But that is not what we want to see in where we're heading now and the push for our green transition. So I think we need to be, for those smaller communities, a little aware of where we are heading with some of those programs, and listen to the boots on the ground, listen to the little people who are telling everyone, okay, we need a little time to think here.
Kenneth.
I couldn't agree more, Hlynur. About the strategic minerals, just an example, in Greenland we have a deposit of krill. It's finished now. It was mined from the mid-1850s until the 1980s. And during World War II, that was a critical mineral for the US for the production of aluminum back then, for the production of aircraft and anything they used aluminum for. And still we have a lot of critical minerals in Greenland. We are supposed to be, I mean, we can probably have a good competition about having the biggest deposits, but we do have quite a bit. But I think it's also important to think about making the mineral sector a steady employment opportunity for northern communities, because maybe we should also focus on having a transnational cooperation into that. Let's say we are developing and having many young Greenlanders trained within mining. Yes, then there will be this deposit that will be mined for a certain amount of decades. Why couldn't these people go to Canada or Alaska and work in the future? So an Alaskan go to Greenland and work or whatever, so that it becomes a steady occupation for northern communities. And so that it's not only a question of having the strategic cooperation. Yes, that's important, but it's also important to make this a steady livelihood for northern communities.
Yeah.
Maybe just inspired by the panel now. We are all government representative, but I think there's one factor that we really need to keep in mind, and that's the importance of the private sector when we talk the green transition, critical minerals, etc. And just one example that is really important for the Arctic, and that's the shipping. That's one of the areas that's really hard to solve, how to make that green. And the large Danish shipping company Maersk, they said there's no demand for hydrogen solutions in the shipping industry. So what did they do? They ordered 5 or 8 huge vessels that could only go on hydrogen source of energy. So they are creating the demand to say, please find a solution. We already ordered the vessels, and we would like to have green shipping. And I think that could be a component that would be really important for the northern community, for the fragile environment in the Arctic when we talk green transition. So just a private sector angle that I think we need to remember.
Absolutely, absolutely. It'll come into some of the conversations and over the 2 days. And I wanted, maybe to follow up, Kenneth, where you were talking just now. I guess we've seen, and Kenneth, I commend you for your persistence in kind of trying to lead that charge a lot. We've seen this desire for increased, strengthened North American Arctic collaboration. The Nordic countries, there's a number of institutions that have an Arctic component to them. Like the Nordic Cooperation has a really strong Arctic program. There's the West Nordic Council is another example. And, I'd be curious to know, where are we today from a year ago? Because a year ago we sat here and we talked about, this desire to kind of strengthen North American Arctic cooperation. And we looked to the Nordic countries and with a bit of to take stock from what they have happening. And, is there, where are we 1 year on? And are there some of these examples that we might want to look at more closely and as potential models?
Well, maybe I'll keep.
Sure.
Do you want me to
Yeah,
keep
Heidi, absolutely, yeah.
Listen, there are some existing institutions, obviously, that sit behind North American cooperation on the security side. Of course, we have NORAD. But I would also say, specifically in the context of the last year, we have been advancing with the United States, which everyone in the room knows how robust that relationship is. But as part of the renewed partnership between Canada and the United States, we have added a chapter or a volume in there on Arctic dialogue and Arctic cooperation. So last year we had our first session, and I will say one way to describe that was robust, because I think we had about 20 departments and agencies around the table, discussing, our interests and working to identify areas of joint priority and working together on Arctic affairs. So we will be bringing that forum together, back together annually, including this summer. So I think that is a productive way to build and leverage that particular relationship. Ken and the ambassador have already mentioned the agreement between Nunavut and Greenland, which I think is a good, the renewal of that is a good concrete example of how to move ahead on that front. And of course, we had a joint declaration with the Kingdom of Denmark at the time of last summer's visit to really dig down on those areas of interest and synergy. Very often, I think we suffer a degree of like-mindedness amongst our relationship, in that the relations are so good and so strong, and we rely on that we actually need to also concentrate on working on areas to dig down on those critical minerals. Was the last round of discussion, which I think is relevant there. But just also moving it to another layer, the geographic proximity of North America, and just bringing it to the people-to-people linkages and the communities that are actually linked across borders. One of the initiatives that we funded last year was a youth initiative implemented by the Institute of the North, where we have 21 students from across Greenland, Canada, and Alaska working on a fellowship to engage and build resilient societies. So I think we trying to look at this relationship at all levels to bring sort of that level of innovation and acceleration. Theme of the conference.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, so I just want to mention maybe two things here. So Greenland initiated a declaration of cooperation between Iceland and Greenland, which was signed at the Arctic Circle in October last year, and it provides I think a model for further north-to-north cooperation, and it sets out the framework for expanding trade, economic and cultural cooperation, while also delving into specific topics such as fisheries, climate and biodiversity, gender equality, and education. This is, it's I feel a very normal step in the relationship between Iceland and Greenland, which has been a good one and a close one for decades, and the second one also then bringing in the Faroe Island, which is the West Nordic Council, which is a cooperation forum between the parliaments and governments of Greenland, Faroe Islands, and Iceland. This is a platform that was founded in 1985. And there is a very close cooperation between those nations, similar economies, similar challenges, and all three are micro-economies. And we are connected logistically and cultural trade and cooperation, etc. And I think that could also be a potential partnership where we can work much closer with the Canadian North on that platform. And Kenneth, you might want to throw in some ideas there? Or?
Yeah, I was thinking about the, not NORAD, but NORA, without the D. That's the Nordic Atlantic Cooperation. I was in the board of NORA back in 2003 to 8, something like that. And we had a task given by the Nordic Council of Ministers that we should try to work more with the neighboring countries. I mean, with Scotland and also with Eastern Canada back then. And we made some project corporations back then with Eastern Canada, with Nova Scotia, with Newfoundland, Labrador. And we also had some conferences and so on, interesting stuff going on. I mean, NORA is basically a cooperation between Iceland, Greenland, and the Faroe Islands, and coastal Norway. And I found it quite good back then, but it somehow, it died. It didn't continue. I think maybe we should look for, to revitalize these kind of corporations.
Just as a comment to that. I think also in practical terms, it would mean for us as governments to make sure that we encourage those partnerships. We have to allocate funds for it. We have to make sure that we create the right meeting places. To be very honest, I think it's fair to say that, at least for some of us that are Russia's immediate neighbors, a lot of our efforts in cooperating cross-border, what we broadly call people-to-peoples cooperation, has been focused on working with Russian regions and people of the Russian north. You will find that, if you go back and look at what's happened in the last almost 30 years, you will find that everywhere. And if you go back to the mid-2000s, cooperating with Russia was definitely at the center of Norwegian high north policy, as we like to call it back then. So I think that there's a sort of always limited capacity. And with that focus, there was perhaps less attention to what we could do with Canadian partners, with partners from Alaska and other parts of the West Arctic, if we like to call it that. In the current situation, where, as we say, there can be no business as usual with Russia, and in our case, business as usual is not just meetings in the Arctic Council. Business as usual is really what, if you go back 10 years before the first incursions into Ukraine, was, a lot of bilateral attention to Russia with ongoing visits both ways all the time and so on. So the situation we're in now is that we should have a capacity to work much more with each other and look at some of those partnerships, as Kenneth mentioned. And personally, I think we should spend a lot more time and effort on that as we move forward, and because the opportunities are there for the taking, and we have to think anew. If we go back to where we started a year ago, we still didn't know where is this going, what's going to happen. Now we know that we will not be working what is in our case our big neighbor for a long, long time to come, and we will have more different partnerships, and that also creates some opportunities. Yeah.
I think that because resources are limited, as you noted, Ambassador, it's important that we get as much out of the existing collaboration mechanisms that we have, rather than just multiply fora for cooperation. As my Canadian colleague said, we really did treat the full range of Arctic cooperation issues, which is important, as our Senator Lisa Murkowski is fond of saying. Arctic states and Arctic peoples are not about one thing, we're about lots of things. And even if security is a big issue for conversations now, it's important to remember it's not the only important issue. There are many other issues that are important too, and we need to keep focus on them. I'm very proud of the work that we do in the U.S.-Greenland Joint Committee with Greenland and the Kingdom of Denmark. We just had a meeting late last year in Brunswick, Maine. In that forum, we work on increasing cooperation in education and culture and economics and science. And at those meetings, we noted that mining and energy sector cooperation among partners was going to be all the more important. And so I look forward to using those mechanisms that we have, the U.S.-Canada Arctic Dialogue, the U.S.-Greenland Joint Committee, getting as much out of them for our people as we look at the challenges we share and the opportunities that we share because we're part of this interesting subregion.
Fantastic. So before I go to a very quick lightning round, because then we can open this up to the audience, I'm just going to pick up on two little points, because there's all this talk about who has more critical minerals. If there's one thing I've learned, and it was partly through Heather Exner-Perot, because she's done some actual factual research on it, we really just don't have enough critical minerals that we know of that are to meet the demands that we have. And in fact, it's one reason why gas is going to still play a role for time to come. So it's not a competition. We're all in it together. So bring it all to the table. And then I'm just going to quickly mention, because Hanne, you mentioned a lot about the people-to-people cooperation, and I maybe I'll send them an invoice. But I was talking to Jon earlier. There's a journalist called Nathan Vanderklip, and he's just written a few articles about Norway, and I lived in Kirkenes in northern Norway back in 2007. And just go out and read it. It's a great article because it speaks directly to this people-to-people cooperation and that sense of shared identity that has been a project that's been ongoing since the early 2000s, and kind of it's sad, and it's a difficult situation right now for people who have cooperated, and kids go to kindergarten together from Russia and from Norway, and the projects that led to that, and so trying to understand what that means today and going forward. And so anyways, I just thought I'd bring that up because there is the people-to-people cooperation is important, and it's a tie that keeps people together, and we'll see where things go on that end. All right, lightning round, very quick. Okay, over the next year, just name one. What do you see as the biggest challenge, and what do you see as the most promising issue or area in terms of Arctic collaboration?
Start down there.
Start anywhere. Think Jeopardy jump in.
I think we're shifting sides.
Yeah.
Is that the thing?
Should be first instead of last.
We are so creative here. So you start.
No, you start.
Okay, I will take the opportunity of a small break. Okay. I'll just point to one thing, and that is remembering the voice of the youth, because they need to be at the table. And I'm so glad if you spoke to it, Jessica, you did, Madeline, and I think it was you, Heidi, and you are in the room. So you have a big responsibility to really be an active partner in the future. We have a small video that we would show that we did with Kenneth, and where you can see that we always have interns working at the embassy, and we try to recruit them with knowledge from the Arctic, from either Greenland or Faroe Islands. I don't know if it's now that you want to show it, Jessica, or later, but it's a 3-minute thing.
Right before the break, let's do that.
Yep.
Because I think it would be nice to end it that way. Okay.
Super, we do that. Are you ready, Hlynur?
Speed lightning round. So let me repeat the question.
We're at the lightning round.
Over the next year, biggest challenge, biggest opportunity.
Yeah.
We're at the lightning.
We're lightning.
Lightning. We're lightning.
Yeah.
Lightning.
Okay. I wasn't sure about the question. So the biggest challenge, most promising issue. I agree with Hanne here also on the youth. We are hopefully finalizing a youth mobility agreement with Canada within the next few months. That is going to be very meaningful for Icelandic youth to be able to come and work in Canada for up to 2 years. I wouldn't be surprised of some of those who would be interested to go up north and work. I, for example, made it a priority last year to visit all the territories, and that was an eye-opening experience. I understand better than I did before the similarities. When I came to Iqaluit, it was like coming to Iceland. In a way, the wind was straight in my face, and there was not a tree in sight. So I understand some of that. So I think that is going to be one of the promising moves next year. And I think what has also been discussed here, this increased conversation in the north is also it's going to result in positive achievements and collaborations. And I think at least for Iceland, we've probably never been this engaged, for example, with the Canadian North as we have this past year and a half. And it is actually, it's a good place for Iceland to be.
Well, I would say the challenge very much lies in the uncertainty. I don't have to elaborate on that, I suppose. But I spoke about the MOU that we have made together with Nunavut, and I feel a strong wish among our politicians, both in Nunavut and in Greenland, that this should not be a document just on the shelf, that this should be something real. And I just see this, I mean, when I'm participating in the talks between the politicians, that they really have a wish, and they are pointing out very concrete things that should be looked into and should be worked on. So yes, I do see a lot of prospect in the year to come for much more cooperation across the Davis Strait from Nuuk to Hlynur, and also other communities in both Greenland and Nunavut. And very concrete things like there might be some techniques. We're quite good at fishing in Greenland, fishing in Arctic waters, and there could probably be even there some exchange of good practices on a very, very practical level that could be good for some of the Canadian northern communities in terms of money.
So in the next year, I predict we will continue to face geopolitical challenges, and we will continue to face the challenges of climate change that so heavily affect the North, its geography, its health, its resilience, and social fabric. So I will say in response to that, I think we need to take very good care of the ecosystems that will bring forward the solutions. And when I talk about the ecosystems, it's the youth, it's the elders, it's the indigenous leaders, the federal, provincial, territorial governments, the think tanks, the scientists, the researchers, and the academics. And if we take care with this ecosystem, which is really will produce the catalytic change, I think, together, I think then we'll be on a good path.
As a big old southern boy, I'm more cut out for thunder than lightning, but I'll still try and be brief. I agree with my Greenlandic and Canadian colleagues. The uncertainty is probably the biggest challenge. In terms of opportunities, as an American practitioner working on Arctic affairs, I'm very pleased that our national strategy is holistic. While it includes security, it also includes climate and the environment, sustainable development, and international cooperation, which is key. And as a cross-cutting priority, for us, we've listed cooperation, coordination, and co-management with Alaska Native tribes and communities, which is of vital importance. I'm also very pleased that the President has announced his intent to nominate Dr. Mike Svrega to be our first Ambassador at Large for Arctic Affairs. Many of you know him, and he will bring a lifetime of experience on Arctic issues after he's confirmed to this important role, and we look forward to working with him.
I would echo the previous speakers, but saying that climate change and biodiversity will be for years the most important issue. And I do hope that we won't lose an institution that has been very important, meaning the Arctic Council. Finland is supporting maintaining the preeminence of the Arctic Council so that it can function on the scientific base also in future. And we do hope that the handing over the presidency from Russia to Norway will go smoothly.
So, what to say that hasn't already been said, but no, definitely, I mean, on the broader scale, the war in Ukraine and security policy challenges globally will continue to be the biggest challenge, of course, together with the bigger issues of climate change and what we have to do to face up to that. And closer to home, I think, in the Arctic setting, yeah, definitely to preserve what we have, to be able to continue to work together on the extremely important issues of indigenous cooperation, climate change, and also on environmental issues, and a lot of other practical issues that we do need to solve in the Arctic. And as was already said by my colleague, we will definitely be working now in very technical, practical terms to take over the chairmanship from Russia in the months to come. Also, in terms of Norwegian-Canadian cooperation, I would say that looking back, we may have been taking each other for granted a bit. What I see now is that there's an increasing interest also in the private sector that Hanne mentioned for Norwegian-Canadian partnerships, which is great. Again, renewables, minerals, also defense industry, health tech and other spheres. So that's great. And I think a lot of those private sector dimensions also go for our neighbors. And there are a lot of opportunities there that we could now focus more on facilitating and helping out. I think when it comes to Nordic Canadian cooperation, it's important that if we are to have a more close dialogue as 6 countries that have common interests, not only in specific Arctic issues, but as countries, we need to come together and find out and for some substantial dimensions in our cooperation. And we have a good tradition in the Nordics to cooperate both bilaterally with partners and also as a group together with like-minded partners such as Canada, and I'm sure we will find very good, we'll see more of that, and we'll find good paths forward to identifying what can we do more of together.
Let's open it up for questions. We started a little bit late, so we're going to go, just have to hold everyone hostage at the end of the day. But I think there's a microphone, right, somewhere. Okay. There's one, right? There's a question. Oh, yeah, okay.
So, sorry, I'm David Conley with Vital Metals, and this question will be for you, Lou, and it probably won't surprise John. Initially, I obviously want to congratulate you for your country's leadership on the mineral security program. And another area of interest, I think, to many Canadian firms is the DPA, Defense Procurement Act Title III, in which Canadian firms are eligible in a manner similar to U.S. firms. And Canada hasn't been particularly successful yet in applying under DPA, and we're very interested in your guidance and suggestions on how we might improve our performance.
I'm generally reticent to give advice to companies. When I meet with business leaders, when I've served abroad, I always told them, I said, I can talk to you about how I see things, but you need to make your own decisions. You're responsible to your own shareholders. I think the greatest reality is that, as we've seen over the last few months, we're just going to need more of everything. And so the ability to ramp up our production from everything from equipment to munitions is going to be of paramount concern to all of us. So I think there should be room at the table for increased production on all sides. So I would just encourage people to keep applying, because we're going to need all of the munitions and ammunition that we can find, that we can create.
Thank you so much. Madeline Redfern. I attended an interesting meeting of all your respective countries' naval representatives in Halifax this past fall. And what struck me was a comment made by Rob Hubert, who said that, or actually it was his response to a comment on that we're really great at cooperating and planning for our annual Arctic sort of, military, what do we call those, sort of planning events. And he said, yes, absolutely. But we have a year to do that. What he said was, concerned about how quick can we actually respond when there's an actual event that might happen in the Arctic. And we're now starting to see with, China with the balloons and the buoys and aircrafts, and whether that be jets or drones or underwater drones, is how quick are we actually starting to plan for quick responses. I know Senator Murkowski was quite vocal in her comments about, should it take 2 days for us collectively to respond to a balloon that comes into our space? So I'm just kind of curious, and I know that you're diplomats, and generally speaking, one wants to be cautious about sort of, making these sort of statements that are in the realm of national security and defense, but nonetheless, is that, as Robert Hubert said, we need to be much, much faster in figuring out how we cooperate in a more timely manner than the annual exercises that we do great at.
I could try to get it a go, because I think there's so many different types of crisis. What we have discussed is very much the geopolitical security ones. But I think one of the elements that really make us able to respond quickly to crisis is the preparatory work that we have been doing in the Arctic Council. When we talk oil spill, when we talk search and rescue, these are different type of crises where we need to react very quickly in an area where people are very far from each other and where an oil spill would be catastrophic in so many ways. So I think actually preparatory work that we've done in the Arctic and the Arctic Council working groups to prepare for these crises, so we have been training, we know how to act, and actually solve some of the real crises that impacts people of the North. I think that is one of the responses to two types of really important crises.
I would just say I don't think it's an either-or situation, it's a both-and. And when we do these large-scale exercises, northern and in other climes, we often find that the lessons that we learn are things that are going to help us respond more effectively, more quickly when we need to. So we're certainly all in favor of robust exercises, and we're able to do these types of things in other sectors as well. I was just thinking of how we brought together, under the auspices of a Sustainable Development Working Group project, the One Arctic, One Health project, public health practitioners from various Arctic states in Tromsø last year to talk about zoonotic vectors of disease. So tabletop exercises and exercising is not just for the military, it's also for other agencies in government. And when you've looked at these problems, these types of problems, and gone through them, you can hopefully learn lessons that you can apply when you're dealing with a crisis situation.
I agree to what has been said here before. I think, for example, when it comes to search and rescue, we have a fairly quick response time to any kind of crisis that have to do with that. I mean, for example, the Icelandic Coast Guard and the search and rescue teams, they're doing this on a regular basis with any of our fishing fleets or on land situations that we might have. There is, and then you have the political side of things, like the balloon. Should we shoot it down now or let it go its trail and watch it and then take it over our water? That's a political decision in the end. They could have taken it down right away if they wanted. But I think maybe in this, it's what might need to be looked at is the surveillance in the Arctic and the status of the surveillance in general when it comes to objects, as you said, fishing boats or aircraft or whatever it is, just based on the report that I read last year on Arctic surveillance from the Canadian authorities on the kind of status of communications and between agencies, etc. That might be something that the partners might want to view.
I know we're running over time, but just one other layer and dimension of it, I think, Madeline, that is really important is, yes, the exercising is going on, but equally important is the community engagement and communication on what is going on, and to the extent that there is ability to share information, watch points, things like that. And I know that colleagues in Canada across many agencies and departments are working to develop good and regular channels in that regard, because in any emergency, partners are local. And so just to bring that dimension into the conversation.
No, I just, as I think everyone in this room know, I mean, there's not one answer to that question for the whole Arctic area. Demography, climate, and infrastructure is very different picture, say in northern Canada than from northern Norway and so on. And if you're thinking about sort of military preparedness, I would say in our case, we are always saying that we are NATO's eyes and ears in the north. We are there every day, being on the alert, looking out, and so on, and preparing as best we can with our allies for what may be there. And so I think there's not a single answer for the whole Arctic region to those questions. And again, as Hanne said, depends on what we're talking about here. So a complex issue that could be discussed, I guess, in many dimensions.
Kenneth, and then
the local participation is very important. Not only communication and information, it's also a question of engaging local communities in the actual work. Because, I mean, they are a part of the country. I mean, the land, they are people of the land. And I think we should focus much more on that. We are doing it in Greenland, but I think we could do much more on that. You know, engaging the local communities. They are there.
I know there's a question here, and then, because maybe let's get like two or so questions.
Hi, Wilkinsman. Regarding the critical minerals issue, in the U.S. there's this large ongoing debate regarding the need to update and reform some of our permitting systems to facilitate increased domestic production of critical minerals. I'm curious, to what degree is there consensus in your countries regarding how well suited your existing regulatory frameworks for mining are to facilitate responsible mineral development in the Arctic? I'm curious.
You can answer that.
Okay, well, I'll start. Why it takes so long to open the mines is because the companies have to go through a range of different hoops. And in Finland we have this kind of regulation that if there is a deposit that, let's say that it contains cobalt, but it might contain other minerals as well. So the aim is to use the mine to produce all the minerals that are within it. And these needs different technologies to take out the minerals. So also to get the environmental assessment, there has to be a dialogue with the local people who live there. And most often these finds are in places where there are no infrastructure, and how to have a production that has the lowest impact on the environment. For example, the find that I was alluding to in Sokli that has a huge deposit of rare earth minerals. The problem is that it would create a lot of lorries going down the road, creating a lot of dust and being, in that sense, harmful. So now they're looking into a possibility to maybe have a conveyor belt to take the rocks quite a long distance to a processing facility so that all the logistics work together and the environmental impact is the smallest. Another found actually by a Canadian mining company, I think it's one of the richest copper finds in the world because the mineral content is 2% when normally it's 0.2%, but it happens to be on a natural resort. So how do you get it? Because you can't destroy the environment. So that's why these take time. But the urgent need is to do the processes as quickly as can be.
Okay, last comment, and then I think, were you going to make a comment? Me? Yeah. I thought you raised your hand. No, Heidi.
I'll only give a commercial that there's another session on the Canada's critical mineral strategy.
Perfect,
so
exactly. So we have a whole session on that. And,
That's
you know what? And we're running out of time because we've gone over. We do want to play the video right now towards the end as everyone, and then we'll kind of go into the break. We'll do about a 10-minute break because we're a little bit behind. So is it okay if we play the video? Okay.
Canada and the Kingdom of Denmark are Arctic states, and we are neighbors in the north. The cooperation with the Canadian Arctic is of great importance to the Danish embassy. The starting point for our work is the well-being of the millions of peoples living in the north. Since climate change heavily impacts the Arctic, we focus on green transition solutions and sustainable economic development. As ambassador to Canada, it is a great privilege to engage with the beautiful northern regions. Thanks to the historic Hans Island Agreement, Canada, Greenland, and thereby the Kingdom of Denmark share a land border and the longest maritime border in the world.
The relationship between Canada and Greenland spans over thousands of years. As North American Arctic countries, we are faced with many of the same challenges and opportunities. The Greenland representation is therefore dedicated to increase our cooperation on areas such as trade, culture, minerals, energy, research and education. The government of Greenland and the government of Nunavut signed in Nuuk a memorandum of understanding reflecting our mutual commitment to expand and establish a partnership. The new partnership between Air Greenland and the Inuit-owned Canadian North is a very good example of this.
We are working strategically with Arctic business opportunities through the Trade Council's Arctic Business Alliance, or ABA. The way we represent this alliance is by identifying and developing partnerships both on public and on private sector level. One is the Greenland Business Association, another one is the Confederation of Danish Industries. Together with these partners, we organize an annual delegation of more than 30 Greenlandic and Danish businesses for them to join the PDAC conference. We see a lot of interest in sustainable solutions within infrastructure, energy, housing development, and the Kingdom of Denmark can help deliver many of these vital solutions.
Navarana Beverage Nguyunga Iqalung Ninunavume. I'm Navarana Beverage in Iqaluit Nunavut. I'm the first Inuk Honorary Consul here in Nunavut. I have grown up in Greenland and I've lived in Nunavut for the past 22 years or so. I have a very deep connection with both places and I consider both jurisdictions my home. I feel there's so much opportunity for collaboration between the two jurisdictions in many areas, whether it be cultural, economic, and political.
The work we do here at the embassy reflects the ongoing collaboration between Canada and the Kingdom of Denmark. We have created an Arctic Advisory Board, and we are very fortunate to have experts and residents of the Arctic as board members. We also have a dedicated team of colleagues here at the embassy and at the Trade Council, and we work very closely together with good colleagues from Greenland. We also believe in empowering and preparing the youth for the challenges of tomorrow. We therefore have interns at the embassy focusing specifically on the Arctic and with a background from the north. Their perspectives are important since the youth is our future, also in the Arctic.